Hi there, beautiful souls. It's Sadhana, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm here to talk about the Cheimonette Tarot by Eden Gallanter. And I'm going to look particularly today at the Suit of Swords and how Eden has cleverly interwoven the majors, the minors, and the court cards together to tell a story. There are two suits in this deck that have a complete story that is told from the aces through the tens, and that's the Suit of Swords and the Suit of Discs. I will likely do the Suit of Discs in a separate video. But today we're going to look at the Suit of Swords. It's a very blue-purple colored suit, so you won't get to see a lot of the brilliant colors that are characteristic of many of the cards in this deck. It's very watery, just a beautiful, emotional. This has definitely become a soul deck for me. I am as fascinated with its creation as I am with how it delivers accurate and soulful readings. So let's begin with the Tale of the Swords. Reading from her guidebook, the swords represent the intellectual aspects of the human condition. Moths are the sigil of this suit, connecting these cards to 13 death. And that's why I have the death card there beside the Ace of Swords. Swords seek to analyze the world and the significance of humankind within it. And this intelligent curiosity leads to a great deal of profound experience as well as danger and death. The inquiring mind, unafraid of the destructive and unknown aspects of the world, knows that the meaning of life is inextricable from the meaning of death. This suit is one of two progressive suits where the 10 cards tell a story sequentially. Rational thought is, after all, a progressive phenomenon. It builds upon itself rather than existing outside any external notion of time, as does imagination and emotion. If you are not familiar with this deck, I'm just going to share a little bit about the Death card. Death appears here as a woman, pregnant, masked, with the pattern of the false eye upon her. She appears with the priest as a choir boy. So this is a perfect example of how she interweaves the layers, the connections between not only the majors and the minors, but this kind of whole story that the Arcana tells. So here we have the priest as a choir boy with death. She appears with the priest as a choir boy and retaining a sign of God on his forehead. Astride her as though she was his mother, looking adoringly at her masked face. Social institutions are forever in love with death because the end of life makes meaning bloom like a rose into it from the far side, touching every event, every word, every breath we take. The end of the story illuminates the beginning. Death is masked because that meaning is hidden to us until she looks us in the face. As death comes for us, or brushes up with her wing, she is pregnant because death creates life, just as life creates death. The sigil of the Suit of Swords indicates the logical end of rational thought, always ending in the realization of mortality and destruction and all the suffering of the world around us. And so as a tarot reader, the Suit of Swords is one of my favorite suits for that reason, just because it is such a challenging suit to navigate, and one has to be very brave, very courageous to be on that journey and be able to face all of the challenges that the swords represent. So let's go ahead and look at the story of the Ace of Swords. So pictured here in the Ace of Swords is the Princess of Swords. And so there is her card. All aces are the beginning of the central concept of their suit. Therefore, the Ace of Swords is the initial leap of faith out of a childish, solipsistic world of unexamined living and into a realm of deeper inquiry and understanding. The Princess of Swords, she does not appear in any other pip card, is in the act of jumping off one of a city's many faceless towers. A moth flies ahead of her as if leading her way. She expects danger or challenge. She holds her sword over her head in preparation for a strike. Her eyes are closed rather than blindfolded, as are the priest or a woman in fortitude. She willingly shuts her eyes, either as a safeguard against the terror such a leap might inspire, or else to tempt fate. She is not afraid to die. Her mind's appetite for new knowledge gives her courage. What happens to her after this leap? As the suit of swords progresses, we never see her again. The faceless towers crumble, and the wilderness of trees take root in their ruins. But this initial leap is never resolved. None of us knows what will happen to us after that leap. The meaning is in the courage and confidence necessary to accomplish it. So an Ace of Swords requires so much courage, the rawness, the unknown. I often say to clients when I'm reading, like, this is the no bullshit card. This is, you've got to step in this with 100% of your courage, your mind, your thought, and go forward, because the potential here is limitless. And often this is the Ace of Swords is about diving into something that you probably aren't aware of, what's coming forward. It's kind of like opening a can of worms. And then we move into the Two of Swords, which is traditionally about a decision. But here we have the Prince of Swords, two Princes of Swords facing each other. And I have to tell you a story when I first saw this card and what it represented for me. To sit or to stand face to face, forehead to forehead, connected with another soul is a very powerful experience. And I had this experience when my mother died, being in the hospital, and she had her feet over the edge of the bed and she was ready to leave. She wanted to go home. And I think I was standing, or I may have been on a high chair, a high stool. And I remember having my forehead against her forehead and just being quiet and wishing that someone were there to photograph this profound, deep moment. It was only minutes after that she left this earth. But it was, anyway, that's what this card brings up for me. It's a very, very deep, profound soul realization card. And so in this card of decisions and moving left or moving right, we have, I don't know, something really beautiful here. Eden says, the towers are beginning to crack, and the Prince of Swords faces off with himself. One prince is armed with both swords, and the other prince has none. The unarmed prince has a gentle hand on the shoulder of the other, and one hand hidden behind him. What is in this hand? Is it a gift? Is it a weapon? The princes are oddly profiled and seem to have only one leg. They are two halves of the same person, and their aggression or kindness for one another is really aimed only at themselves. This is a struggle of self-understanding, dangerous because of the violent, wounded, or unstable aspects of the human identity which will attack that which seeks to unearth them and expose them to the scrutiny of daylight. The princes can destroy themselves, but their struggle is to see and understand each other. In this interpretation of the card, there is no blindfold. It is a deep, soul-searching realization to destroy oneself or to step forward into the daylight. As we move to the Three of Swords, we meet the Queen, one of the most beautiful Three of Swords that I have ever seen. Eden says, as if time is running more slowly, the Queen of Swords almost floats above the Three Swords, about to pierce her, facing the pain of her death calmly. The swords are aimed at her forehead, mouth, and heart. A more complete depiction of mental anguish, and one that includes a crisis of identity along with the more common symbols of disillusionment and heartbreak. So for sure, you can use this deck as at a Rider-Waite-Smith kind of level, or you can choose to go deeper into the suggestions that are made in the story that is being developed here. Whereas the princess faced danger in the first card, the prince faced himself. The queen is confronted with terrible suffering. The cracked towers behind her begin to sprout tree seedlings. The city is in the process of disintegration and reclamation by biological life, which urge on the erosion of human constructs. The queen is armed with the revelation that her pain has a purpose, and this knowledge helps her face her own suffering without flinching or turning away. So one of the things that I say to clients in the Three of Swords is that it's really important, if this is about grief, if this is about suffering, that you face it and that you be in it completely. You understand it and you don't run away from it. You don't sweep it under the carpet. You make time to fully embrace this stage and this place that you're at. And then here we have the Four of Swords. We have two Queens of Swords here, head to head. The one on the top being a little more ethereal. The Queen of Swords sleeps inside a tree while the city continues to crumble. One of the queens holds a sword over her heart, as if for protection. This card is about the creation of a haven of peace and rest in a world of danger. So you can simply leave it at that and stay with your Rider-Waite-Smith interpretation, or you can delve a little deeper. But what does it mean when yourself is head to head with your soul? And what is this period of rest about? And how is this very, very important after processing the energy of the Three of Swords? The queens accept the frailty of their world and of themselves, and of their entombment in this tree is an acknowledgement of the supreme laws of nature. This card is also about intelligent study of trying to understand a living system of human or natural origin with empathy, rigorous analysis, and insight. So very, swordsy kind of energy, traditional swords kind of messages. Instead of fighting against the encroaching wilderness or attempting to sequester themselves from it, they accept its superiority, power, and try to understand it. Occupying the body of the tree and listening to the rise and fall of its biological fluids and the progressive layering of its rings, demarcating the passage of time as the human world slides toward its destruction. So this sounds very Tarot of the Trees-ish, but really learning to find the balance and harmony with the oneness of the earth and all that is around us. And so in the contemplation, in the rest, in the healing that takes place in the Four of Swords, so many things can happen. In the Five of Swords, we have all of these people in silhouette, and you can see here the swords are falling. None of the swords are being held here. They are all being released. A mysteriously intact bridge bearing a line of people holding hands becomes a plateau from which the chain of people are drawn up into the sky. The people grow larger and deform somewhat as they rise towards the top of the image. This is an escape that necessitates a transformation and an acquisition of more godlike cares and responsibilities. Is this the ultimate dominion of the human race, or is it its destruction? We have certainly more power over the world we occupy and each other than any other species in known history, and it is equally obvious that we are not godlike in our wisdom, foresight, ideals, or understanding. Like other animals, we have petty desires, weak insight into future consequences, small understanding, and even smaller wisdom. We are justifiably proud of our own accomplishments and justifiably afraid of ruining ourselves. Will our ascension into the heavens save us, or will it destroy us? As in all transformations, we will be saved through being destroyed, and then, as if irresistibly, reborn. So if we look to this card and look to more traditional meanings, is there a connection? And I think that goes with the choice. I mean, sometimes I look at the Five of Swords. I believe it was Robin Wood who called it the Nana Nana Boo Boo card. It's a very, very childish energy. It's a very naive kind of energy that we see in the person who usually is the victor in a traditional Five of Swords. But here we have something quite different. And it's really important to understand that we need to be as grounded and as comfortable with being on earth, which is a connection to our ego. We need to be as comfortable and as at home with our ego as we are with our spirit self. And so wherever we are on that ladder, wherever we are in that development, we need to be able to go to and from and, move within that paradigm. The Six of Swords introduces us to the Prince. So here we have 3 Princes of Swords, 6 swords, and then the moth you can see at the front of the image here. Three princes overlaid, armed with 6 swords, each which carry the false eye of the death moth at its pommel. All 6s are uniquely balanced incarnations of their suit's concept. All 6s are uniquely balanced incarnation of their suit's concept. And the 6 of Swords achieves true brilliance in its representation of extraordinary human powers of reason, creative problem solving, and intuitive extrapolation and interpolation to fill in gaps in information or understanding. Just the language of this guidebook makes it a very swordy deck. So you need to be comfortable with these words and take time to absorb the meaning. And I just think this is absolutely brilliant. The 3 princes exert their mental powers in an organized trio, checking results, locating mistakes, and iterating experimental solutions until the truth has been found. This card is the only pip card in this suit that exists outside the falling city, a card of ideological integrity that stands alone and also outside the world of human experience. It is the power we have to reach outside of ourselves and into the larger scientific, mystical, moral, and material truths of the universe outside the boundaries of our experience. There is great potential to destroy ourselves within such an appetite for knowledge. The false eyes on the swords may lead us to harm ourselves, but the moth guards. If we look at a traditional 6 of Swords with the boat and moving away through the water, we can draw connections. I feel that if there is a potential to destroy ourselves, it is in the 5 of Swords. And what this deck has taught me is that the 6 of Swords is that honest opportunity to truly leave that behind, that potential for self-destruction, and to move forward into the unknown and to try to find that perfect harmony, that perfect synergy with whatever it is that we are trying to work through. So again, another really brilliant card. The 7 of Swords is one of the few pip cards without a human subject. The moth, as the sigil of swords, appears hovering over the trunk of a tree pierced with 7 swords, drawing bright red blood from the bark of its body. Beginning with the 6 swords begins to manifest as the use and abuse of power from here on up. The moth feeding itself on the tree's blood is in an act of power. The power of the more powerful being nourishing itself by taking from the less powerful. So when I first read that, that was like, whoa. So traditional 7 of Swords, something is being taken. Somebody is claiming to be more powerful in taking something from someone. And here, how can we possibly say the moth is more powerful than the tree? Like, it's crazy. I'm just sometimes dumbfounded by the considerations that this deck has brought up. This is one of the more troubling aspects of life. In reality, only photosynthetic creatures and some microbes can survive on inorganic matter and energy. Taking what we need and want from the world, even to the point of taking the lives of living things, is a part of our biological existence. Whoa. So imagine looking at a traditional 7 of Swords and me saying, taking what we need and want from the world, even to the point of taking the lives of living things, is a part of our biological existence. This is a card that lies beyond value judgments. It is a fact. And our human perspective will attempt to assign moral value to it in vain. Sometimes we need to take what we need to survive. Pretty powerful stuff. Okay. And then the 8 of Swords. The 8 of Swords in this deck is truly a brilliant take on the 8 of Swords. I know there are, the one Anna Kay, for example, comes to mind, but this one has something truly unique. So here we meet the king in a narrow crack between two buildings. He uses his swords and ingenuity to climb upwards, trying to get free of his restrictive environment. The falling city has buried him, and he is saving himself. This card represents the fullest bloom of the mind and its ability to quickly analyze, creatively form decisions, and use reason to set itself and the rest of us free of all fetters. This card is arguably the most powerful of all the swords, and the last card in this suit that signifies our own control over our situation and ourselves. The king intelligently recognizes his own perspective for what it is, accepts the limitations of his reasoning and the limitations imposed upon him by his environment, and proceeds using every fact at his command. This card has true greatness in it, and an inherent desire and ability to change the world we live in and solve the problems the human race has created. Like, holy cow, just that's such a wow card for me. And then moving to the night, or traditional nightmare card, the compulsive analysis, an active reasoning of the 8, turns in on itself, having reached the limits of human capacity. Power is suddenly lost, along with perspective and the integrity of the personality. This card is a descent into madness. The Queen of Swords clings to one of the trees. The city, in the last mighty crash of its own apocalypse, thunders down around her. So I guess here we really need to ask ourselves, what does the city in this suit represent? And what does it represent for you? While the moon, with a strange new face, looks out at us from the sky, while the mad queen howls or sings or screams below, this is the card of nightmares, of suffering and pain and losing hold of reality and even of the sense of one's own identity. In this violent and destructive leap past the limits of the human mind, however, we are surrounded by truths not normally available to us within the world we can understand. Inside madness and terrible mental suffering lies the food of the gods, and only fools and artists willingly reach into this dangerous place in their holy ignorance or their pursuit of greater vision. have nothing to say. It's just so brilliant. And then the final card of the suit, the end of everything, the King of Swords again, as two kings leaning quietly against one another after a brutal death, from which the blood still flows. They sit in a graveyard where the gravestones of memory, with the one R facing forwards and the one R looking backwards, appear. The city, at last, totally destroyed. The death moth sits on their heads, feeding itself off the blood of the kings. Like the 10 in all the suits, the 10 of swords is a card of death, an end of the story. The swords, as a suit of human reason, merely indicate a more violent death than the other suits. The road of reason is not an easy or even a pleasant one, but the insatiable need for knowledge is stronger than the desire for happiness. In swords, curiosity is always stronger than the part of us that seeks to survive. So there we have it. This is the Cheimonette Tarot by Eden Gallanter. I believe the website is cheimonette.com, but I will link it in the description box below. If you are interested in discussing this deck, I would love to chat with you in the comments below. Stay well, my friends. Namaste.